Okay. So the first thing I want to remind you about with regards to walls is that our walls are tied to vertical definition in Revit. So that's the first thing I want to talk about, right? And so I'm going to go to an elevation view over here, and I want to remind you about our levels, right? Everybody feel pretty confident about creating levels? Good. Okay. So these levels, they define our model vertically, right? And it doesn't matter if it's in a positive manner upwards or if it's in a negative manner downwards, like a basement, right? But they do define our models vertically. And what that means is, for example, if I select this wall, I can look over here at its properties, right? And I can see that we have a base constraint of main level and we have a top constraint of roof. So our wall goes from main level all the way up to roof. Okay, so that establishes where that wall starts and where it stops. And we establish those relationships so that if something changes in the model, like the roof goes up to 24 feet instead of 18, right? Because there is a relationship between the wall and the wall will move with the level if things change, right? And in a pretty simple model like the one we have, you think, oh, it's not really a big deal, right? But if you have a very complicated model and a lot of people are working on it, then it's very valuable because everybody's always working on the most current information, essentially. All right, if you want to have that wall extend just above or just below a level without unassigning it from a level, right? You can choose to assign a base offset or a top offset. So a base offset is, for example, 6 inches. I want this wall to still be associated with main level, but I want it to be 6 inches above main level. Okay, that's a base offset. A top offset, this would be perfect for something like a parapet on a commercial building, but a top offset, let me grab that again, would be, let's do a 2-foot offset for your wall here. That would allow that wall to extend up 2 feet above the level it's assigned to. Okay. One important thing I want to remind you of is that even if your wall is well, I'm not going to say a wall's undefined because walls should never really be undefined in Revit, but even if you know that the wall's 20 feet, right? Assign a level at 20 feet and assign your wall to live between a bottom constraint and the top constraint, which is 20 feet. Don't ever leave your walls unconnected, right? It means they're undefined, and if things change, then they don't change. Okay. All right. So we know how, look at our little desk hanging out down there. Speaking of levels, right? Not only do walls have levels connected with them in Revit, but our other elements like furniture and components have levels associated with them. So things like a desk, right? That is associated with the basement level. If I select the object and I change that to main level, you see it popped up to main level. So there's our little desk. Okay, so levels are pretty important. They give a lot of definition to the model. And where we're at right now with Revit, specifically with walls. Okay. When you start a Revit file with a generic template, and when I say generic template, I mean, right, the construction, the architectural, structural, or mechanical templates, okay, you have predefined levels in there. So you maybe have 1 or 2 levels in there. You also have some predefined wall types in there, okay? So in the architectural template here, I'm going to go back to my main level. If I click on the wall command, I look under my properties dialog box here with this little drop down, which you all should be familiar with, and I see that I do have some predefined kind of wall types in here, okay? They're all named, and the naming gives some hint at what type of wall it is. It's an exterior wall, and what kind of wall assembly it is, right? Brick and CMU and metal stud, essentially. Okay. It's a pretty important thing to recognize because when you are in Revit and you want to create new walls and there's a wall type that is not existing, within Revit we don't have a button that says, click here for a new wall type, right? Click here for a new window type. Click here for a new door type. We don't have a new type button. The way that Revit works is you take an existing object that we have here and you choose, when you're creating a new wall type, for example, you're going to choose the wall that is most similar in assembly to the new one that you want to generate. You're going to duplicate it, rename it, redefine it, and then reuse it. Okay, so the idea behind Revit isn't that we create a lot of brand new elements with like a from scratch, but you take something that's existing and you reuse it with a new definition, right? At first, when I started using Revit, having been an AutoCAD user for a really long time, I thought that's ridiculous, right? Because in AutoCAD and a lot of CAD programs, the second you start reusing something over and over and over and over again, the more likely you have to have garbage come along with it, right? So extra layers, extra, just junk that people have defined, and then if you use it again, it just gets bigger in size, it gets more complicated, it has more garbage associated with it, right? So in my mind, I thought, the idea of being able to create brand new items always made sense to me because new items don't have, old baggage with them. But in working with Revit for a really long time now, I found that I don't tend to have that same problem in Revit that I do in AutoCAD. So the system does work, right? And the system works in that I don't get garbage associated with old items, but also I don't have to recreate things from scratch, which is a lot of work, right? Especially with creating like wall types. There's a lot of information that needs to be input, and it needs to be input in the correct manner. And so to create things from scratch tends to be a lot of work, okay? So it does make sense to take something that's existing, duplicate it, rename it, redefine it, and reuse it, okay? So you all are familiar with how to draw walls. You're all familiar with how to give them a definition at the top and bottom. But let's just go back over how we create a brand new wall type, right? And this is going to be a topic, and I said this before, it's going to be a topic that echoes all the way through Revit, right? Whether you're creating a new wall type, a new door type, a new window type, the process is going to be the same, okay? So I want to create a new wall type, and I want it to be an exterior wall type, and I want it to be CMU on wood stud, okay? So the first thing I've told you is you're going to find a wall type that is most similar to the new one you want to generate. Now that may be that you have that wall type already drawn in your drawing board, but it also may be that you initiate the wall command. I use my drop-down menu here, and I find one in here that is very similar to what I want to create, CMU on metal stud. I engage it by clicking on it. And before I even draw anything, I'm able to access that wall type, duplicate it, rename it, and redefine it, okay? So I can hit Edit Type. I can choose Duplicate. Yeah, go ahead. Duplicate. I'm going to give it a new name, CMU on wood stud. Hit OK. What I just did there by choosing the wall type, hitting Edit, duplicating, and renaming is I did just those things, right? I took a wall type that was very similar to what I wanted to generate. I duplicated it, I renamed it, and now I'm ready to redefine it, okay? By duplicating it, I essentially leave the original alone. So I still have the CMU on metal stud in my library for use later. So that's there, ready for use, unchanged. But now I have this new object that I can manipulate. So I've renamed, or excuse me, sorry, I've duplicated, I've renamed. It's time for me now to redefine this assembly. So I'm going to click on Edit here. And let me just preface this by saying you're probably thinking, Revit is so complicated. Revit has so many settings. There's so many buttons and so many dialog boxes, right? And there definitely is, especially with wall types. So it gets better though, because with doors and windows, the dialog boxes are much simplified, right? Wall assemblies are kind of inherently just very complicated, right? There's a lot of pieces to them. And that's why we have so much definition in this particular object. But as we move forward with other things, the process remains the same, but the redefinition is a lot more simple, okay? So I'm just gonna pull that dialog box a little bit. There we go. So here is all of the definition for that wall, okay? You notice I have it renamed on wood stud. So I have all of my pieces of my wall assembly here. And the piece that I want to alter is this structure, metal stud layer, okay? So I'm gonna click on metal stud layer. There's a little ellipsis here. I'm gonna click again. right? And I'm going to find my wood stud, which in this material browser here, I just need to type wood. And a wood stud is actually softwood lumber, right? Douglas fir is softwood, considered a softwood. I click on it and I hit OK. All right. And if I needed to edit anything else, I could, but I don't need to in this case. So I'm just going to hit OK, OK. And now I have that wall type for me to use. So if I go to architecture, wall, there we go. And it's what I want it to be. Okay. And that all started with this. Now I'm going to click on this wall type and I'm going to hit edit again because there's just a couple of things I want to talk about in this structure dialog box here. All right. I haven't renamed or redefined or done anything yet, but I just want to talk about this dialog box a little bit. All right. This is where our wall assembly lives. Okay. And a few things I want to define a little bit more. I think we touched on it last time, but I want to talk about the function, the material, and the thickness of this. All right. So the first thing I want to remind you of is that we have an exterior side and we have an interior side. Okay, and if we navigate up the left-hand side of this, you see my little cursor turns to a horizontal arrow, right? And when it's a horizontal arrow like this, I can click on a layer and it highlights it, right? I can change the functionality of the material that I am defining in this wall assembly. And essentially we have, I think we've got 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we have 6. We have 6 different functions. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to assign a function to the material that you are applying to this wall type. So we have finishes, we have substrates, we have thermal air layers, we have, well, structure's not in there. Let me pick this one. Structure, oh, it is number 1. We have finish number 2, and we have a membrane layer. Okay. So you're going to first define what kind of action this material takes in the wall type. So generally, I would say that you want to start from the top and move down. Okay, or I say from the top, but either side would be okay. So I could start from the bottom and move my way up. When I'm assigning different functions, I don't usually start in the middle. Okay, and the reasoning for that is that I like to start with my finishes on the exterior, right? And I like to kind of move in towards the structure, essentially, all right? These objects, they have a number behind them because they need to go in numeric order from whatever side you are working from to the core boundary, which is the structure, okay? So you'll notice that the finish is 4, 3, membrane layer, 2, structure, 1. So they count down from the outside and the inside. 5, membrane layer, doesn't have a number, to 1. Right? We're skipping 4, 3, 2, which doesn't matter. But as long as these things go in numeric descending order to the core boundary, it'll work. If I change this to like number 4 and I hit OK, it'll say, oh, error row, 4 layer function priorities cannot ascend. And you're like, that's kind of gibberish, right? But essentially what it's saying is you can't, 3, 2, you can't assign something out of numeric order when you're creating these wall types, okay? So if you've done that and you've got an error, that's the reason why. So we're going to make these descending, okay? On the interior side, I tend to use finish number 5, and it doesn't really matter, but I use finish number 5, okay? And on the exterior side, I tend to use finish number 4. That's just a designation, right? And then I further define what that finish is with the material. So we assign a function, we assign a material, we assign a thickness, and then we hit OK. All right. You can add or subtract things from this assembly. So I could click on finish and I could hit delete and it goes away. Great. I could take this membrane layer and I can move it down. Great. That works, right? So I can move things around just a little bit too in here. One other thing I want to talk about with materials, I think I touched on this last time, is that, of course, if we want to change a material, I'm going to click on the little ellipsis here. We have a lot of materials in our material library inherently in Revit, okay? And really, not to overcomplicate this, these materials are really just, they're really just a name, right, and a picture, essentially. So, with aluminum, I don't get a lot of like, what is the conductivity of aluminum? What is the thermal resistance? What is the mass? What is, right? I don't have to physically define what these items are to create a new material, all right? And you're going to have to create a new material in one of your upcoming assignments because you're going to create some wall types. And there's not a wood siding material in our library here, okay? So I want to show you, you know, if I wanted to create a wood siding material, we have this little globe down here. I can click on it and choose Create New Material. And a default new material pops up. And you're thinking, well, okay, it's wood siding, but is it hardy board? Is it real wood? What is it? It doesn't really matter, right? You can just give it a name, and that's what that material is. So I can right click, rename, and let's say this is wood siding. And you can even give it a thickness, 3/4 inch, enter. I just created a new material, okay? So if I needed to create wood siding, that's how I would create a new material. I could then apply it to the wall assembly. Now, with this wood siding, any other further definition for us would just really be, what does the pattern of it look like, you know, on my elevation? So you'll see we have things like surface patterns, a cut pattern, what does it look like in floor plan view? So I can further define the aesthetic nature of it, but I don't need to, you know, go into what the material is made of, right? So I could say my surface pattern, and Revit in these newer versions, this is something that is new from like maybe it was 2018, actually. Maybe 2018 introduced it, but this is within the past 2 years. They've added a foreground and a background. So in the foreground, the pattern looks heavier, it looks darker, and in the background, it looks lighter. So my foreground surface pattern, I have wood siding. Let's say I want it to be horizontal wood siding. So I'm going to click in this little area, and I'm going to look for a pattern. Oh, horizontal small lines. Okay. Great, and I want them to be, we'll say black. So I click on the color and I hit OK. Oh, that's purple. Is that purple? Yes. There we go. Okay. The background, maybe I want it to look gray. So I still want those small horizontal lines. Okay, but I want it to be gray. Okay, so things closer to me appear heavy, things farther away look light. Okay, the cut pattern, I'm just going to do a foreground cut pattern. I'm going to go down to, okay, I'm not finding, oh, there it is, solid. And we'll just leave it gray. Okay. Oops, so now my structure is wood siding. I didn't mean to change the structure. I'm going to change that back. See, Revit doesn't really care what it is, right? Softwood lumber, okay. I'm going to change I'm going to click on my little row here, and I'm going to hit Insert. Okay, so I inserted a category, and I'm going to make this a finish. And my material now will be my wood siding. Okay, the thickness, we'll do 3/4 of an inch, enter. Okay, okay. And I've just now changed that it's exterior CMU on wood stud. I've just changed that wall type, right? The name doesn't match it anymore, but I've just changed that to have a wood siding, okay? So let's look at this wall type in 3D. And you can see, oop, do you see that now I have that that horizontal pattern that I assigned to that wall, okay? So I'm going to do hidden line so that you can just look at it. That's what it looks like, which is different than this pattern. Okay. So I think I said this before too, but I think the hardest part for beginning students with this whole process, unless you've worked in industry before, right, is not really knowing what wall assemblies are made out of, right? Somebody could say to you, just do a new wall type and make it an interior wood stud wall. And you're like, oh, okay, well, we've got a wood stud and maybe we have drywall, but there's a vapor barrier in there that maybe you don't know about, or there's an air gap somewhere that you don't know about, right? I'm not really worried about you not exactly knowing what the definition of a wall assembly is. I am worried about you knowing how to define one, right? So I want you to know that if you want to create a new wall type, you click on one, you hit edit type, you duplicate, rename, and then you go in here and redefine it. Right? We can change these things. I want you to know that. But I don't really care about if you know that, a wood stud is 5.5 inches, right? Or where the vapor barrier goes, or how thick drywall is, or those type of things. I'm not too worried about that. You'll learn those things when you get into industry. What I am worried about is you being able to actually define them, okay? Okay, any questions on any of that? There's our wall types in 20 minutes, right? Okay, so we have our wall types, right? We know how to draw walls. We know how to define walls vertically using levels. We know how to create new wall types, right? You may not know exactly what the assembly consists of, but you know how to generate a new wall. The next thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about grids, and I also want to talk about adding doors and windows, okay? So I'm going to delete a few of these, and I'm going to pop over here to my canvas, and I'm going to pull up our project. Let's see, our little imbue cabin. There we go. Okay. Hopefully that won't take too long to open up. So, of course, if you go to assignments, right, I think you guys know this by now, after completing an assignment, our imbue cabin PDF is here, and it's just kind of downloading for me, essentially. So when that completes, it will open over here for me. Or maybe I downloaded it and it's already, yes, it is. Okay, that's good. So we have our little imbue cabin here, right? And you've all taken a whack at getting some walls drawn in here. But what would have been really helpful is if you had known, right? And I knew this going into it. You wouldn't know how to draw grids yet, right? But going into it, grids would be very helpful, right? So a lot of these walls are really kind of defined off this grid, right? So how do we use that grid? Number one, how do we draw it? And then how do we use it to help us draw the walls in the right place, right? So I want to talk about that today. Grids are really easy to use, all right? And we can create a grid in a floor plan view. I was just thinking, I don't think, oh yeah, you can, I guess. Or an elevation view. I guess I've just never done that before. I think probably I've never done that before because it makes sense to draw a structural grid in floor plan view, right? But a structural grid, or, if it's not a structural grid, whatever type of grid that helps you organize your architecture, whatever you're drawing, is always very helpful, right? So I want to show you how to add grids, okay? So I'm in a floor plan view right now, so I don't need to navigate to one, but I'm in the main level floor plan here. And I go to architecture, the architecture tab. I'm going to move all the way down here to grid. Okay, so right next to levels, but levels is grayed out, of course, because number one, we're not generating levels right now, but these can only be generated in a view with a vertical definition. So sections, elevations, those type of things. I'm going to click on grid, and you notice we have a few different ways we can draw a grid. We can use the line tool, the pick tool, and we have a couple arcs. I'm just going to use the line tool to create a grid. I'm going to go into my drawing space here. I'm going to click once, move in the direction I want to go, click again, hit escape, and there's my grid, right? It's as easy as that, okay? So if I click on my grid now, you'll notice there's a little bubble at the end. These function a lot like levels in that there's a little check mark here where I can check and uncheck it and have that appear, okay? This little indication right here, this little 3D, okay, this indicates that this grid will be seen in, it's sort of a, if you think about it in terms of if this grid were a physical object and it were twirling around in like a saw blade, right, in space, you can view this in all 3D views, essentially, right? So if this is clicked to 3D, which is what we want to be able to see our grid in all views, this 3D setting is allowing that to happen. So I can come up here, I can click on this little check mark and turn that little bubble at the end on, right? If I don't want it to say 1, I want it to say ABC or A1, A2, A3, or 11, 12, 13, I can do that, okay? So I can click again. I could change that to A if I wanted to, right? Which I'm not going to do. Click, click, 1, enter. There's my first grid. Okay. If I go into my north elevation, there's my grid, right? So it's showing up where it needs to. All right. So I have one grid here. I have a second grid here, and that is 6 feet away from the first grid. So how do I create that? Well, I could grab this grid and I could CO copy it and copy it over 6 feet. That's completely valid. I could also come back up here to the grid command. Looks like it's GR for a keyboard shortcut. Click. I could use my pick tool, right? I could change my offset to 6 feet. Enter. And I hover over this, click, and it creates a second grid 6 feet away from the first one. Okay, so I could click on my little bubble there. Looks pretty good. Without talking about dimensions too much, because we're going to get into that in the next class or two, I do want to show you how to create a simple dimension so that you can check these things, right? Because I look at these and I'm pretty sure that I input 6 feet, but maybe I mistyped something and they're actually 5 feet apart, right? I can click on one and my temporary dimension does pop up, but if for some reason it doesn't happen to pop up, if you want to go to annotate and go to aligned dimension, okay, I can click on one object, click on a second object, click in space, and I get a dimension. So just, I'm going to leave it as simple as that. Click on one object, click on the second object, click in space to end it. All right, escape, escape. I can click on it and hit delete when I'm done. So I just wanted to show you how to create a quick dimension so that you can measure things visually without getting too much into dimensions. You can also come up here to our quick access menu here. We have a measure between two references. It's a little ruler, you see that? Where I can click, and I can click once, click a second time, and I get my temporary dimension. Okay, so I can measure things. I can look for temporary dimensions if they pop up in the right spot, and then I can also add a dimension if I need to. Well, I have another grid over here. Number 3, and it's 9 feet away from the second one. So I'm going to go back to grid, architecture, grid, which is GR, and that was 9 feet, so the offset is 9 foot, enter. Click on my pick, click, there's my grid, right? I turn my little bobble, and again, I always really want to measure things. I'm just used to get used to double checking. 9 foot, looks good. All right, so I'll hurry and just create the rest of these grids. And let's see here. Here we go. 3, so we have 4 through 8 that we need to create. So I'll move through those pretty quickly. Okay, maybe I can even get here we go, my screen to split here. There we go. All right, so grid is GR. I choose my pick, and I want to create grid 4, which is 4 foot off 3. All right, so 4 foot, enter, click. Great. Grid number 5 is 10 foot 6. 10 space 6, enter, click. Great. Next one is 4 foot 6. 4 space 6, enter. Okay. And then we have 3, 4, 5, 6. We have grid number 7 that we want to create, which is 8 foot 6. 8 foot 6. And then we have one more, which is 4 foot. There we go. So I have this system of grid lines, right? Looks great. I click on my grid line and I just turn on my little bobble, and there we go. It's going to sequentially number these. If I had accidentally deleted number 4 and I want to put number 4 back, it would number it as number 9, grid number 9, and I just have to change the number. Okay. So I also have a horizontal grid here. So let's start that. So at grid GR on the keyboard, I I click my first one. There we go. See, it's thinking, well, you had 8 last time, let's do number 9. But I don't want to do number 9, I want A. So I'm going to click again, A, enter. Okay, B is 4 feet off of that, so grid, GR, 4, enter, just like we did on the other ones, the vertical ones. 12 foot 9, 12 space 9, enter. Oh, wrong side. Control Z, Control Z, there we go. Grid, GR. So to C, it's 12 foot 9. There we go. And then to D, it's 6 foot 3, 6 space 3, enter. Click, there's D. And then we have from D to E, we have 19 feet. 19 feet? 19 feet. Okay, 19, enter. There we go. So there's my grid, right? And then I just kind of come in here and I, aesthetically look at it and just make sure it's doing what I want it to do. This is a little bit long, so I click on this, right? I think I said this before too. In Revit, you were probably thinking, well, where did you first decide? Why did you choose to put A right there, right? What dimension is it from the top of this down? Well, I don't have an answer for that, right? I just started creating my grid, A, and it didn't really matter how far it was from, this vertical grid here, right? The only important thing was that at 2 and A, that's kind of where my wall starts, or the window starts right there, I guess I should say, right? The core of that wall starts. So I didn't really kind of pick a specific place to generate this grid. I just made the grid system function the way it should, right? And you're saying, well, these are really long. They are, right? So I'm just going to click on one of them and it links all the rest, and I can drag this up, right? Okay. And it's a little bit askew, right? It's a little close to this, it's a little close to that, further away from here and there. Doesn't really matter. The grid system is working. I could move these elevation markers if I needed to, or if I'm really kind of picky about this, I could grab it because no walls have been generated. I could use the move tool and I could kind of move it, into the center, or I could nudge it with my arrow keys to where I wanted it to be, right? So there's my grid. If I go to an elevation, because those have 3D extents on them, there's my grid. Right? Interacting with my levels. Okay. So we have our gridded system. We know how to create walls. We know how to define them, right? I will draw just a couple walls, and then I want to show you how to add doors and windows to your models. Okay. So, first thing, let's just look at our PDF of our imbue cabin here, right? And I'm going to look here and say, I don't quite maybe know what this wall type is. I'm sure that it's really well defined somewhere else in the set if I remember correctly. Or maybe they didn't give us that. Did they? I do see 2x6 wood framed wall, blown in fiberglass insulation, wall sheathing, air and water barrier. We have a 1-inch air gap, split face CMU block. Okay, so although I don't have a typical wall type defined like as a wall type, I can look at some of these details and figure out what this wall is composed of, right? So hopefully I'll remember what that is, because I'm going to redefine our wall system to look the way I want it to look. Okay. Oh. There we go. Okay. So I want to draw some walls, but I need to create this wall type first. So I'm going to come up to wall, and this one was fairly similar before I messed it up, right? I'm going to choose the wall type most similar to the one I want to generate, which is this new wall type. So I'm going to choose CMU on metal stud because I altered the other one, if you remember. I'm going to hit edit type. I'm going to create a new one by duplicating it. Duplicate, rename, and then redefine CMU on wood stud with wood stud. We'll just wood stud bear. I have to give it a different name. Let's see, we'll call it honed. There we go. So I've given it a new name. I'm going to hit edit to the assembly, and we have CMU 8-inch. Yes, we have a thermal air layer. This thermal air layer is only 1 inch. So instead of 3 inches, 1 inch. We have an air infiltration barrier. Yes. We have plywood sheathing. Are they giving a... They're calling out their sheathing. Good note. See structural. We'll just leave it as plywood, 3/4 inch. Instead of a metal stud layer, we're going to do a wood stud layer, and it's a 2x6 wood framed wall. So I'm going to change this from metal stud to softwood lumber. Hit OK. Oop. A wood stud is 5.5 inches, a 2x6. Then we have our vapor barrier, which they've called out here somewhere. And then they have gypsum wallboard, which they're doing 5/8 inch. So 0, 5/8. And I'm going to hit OK, OK. And I just created a new wall type, right? And I can use that to draw now. All right. So some things I want, I'm going to go back to the floor plan, and I'm going to think about how to draw this now, right? You've all done an exercise and worked on this. But now I have these grids that can help me draw, right? And I'm going to look at how these grids sort of interact with my walls, and I'm going to draw them the best I can. So as I look at this wall assembly, I notice that the grids are not lined up with the outside of the wall. They're lined up with that wood stud, right? Which is the core boundary. That's what it's called here, okay? So I'm going to draw a few of these walls. And I probably will just draw the exterior walls, right? And I'm going to use the definition on my wall to draw them. And that definition will be to use the core boundary to draw them, okay? And you're thinking, how in the world am I going to remember this? But I think it's going to make a lot of sense once I show you exactly what we're doing. Oh, I think our download is done. There we go. All right. So when I say I want to draw these walls according to their core boundary, it has to do with their location line, right? So if I start drawing a wall right now, it's going to be according to its center line. So if I pick this wall or this grid, architecture wall, and I start drawing, you see it's drawing to the center line, which doesn't make sense, okay? That doesn't make sense at all. And so I'm going to go to wall, and if I choose finish face exterior, it draws to the exterior of the wall. Not what I want either, right? I want to start drawing my wall from the core boundary here. Okay, so I don't want the location line to be out here. I want it to be over here. So as I start drawing, I'm going to choose core face exterior, core face. And you see how it changes right to there where I want it to go. Okay, so that's how you're going to get your walls to line up with your grid. Now, if you've drawn it wrong, right? Wrong, right? You could always go back and line it up using the align tool. So I could type AL, align, which is also under modify. There's align. And I could pick this grid line. This is the grid line. Click. And I'm gonna try and hit that line. See, it's not selecting it, so I can tab. See how when I tab, it chooses different points? Tab, click, and it will align it to that, right? So if you've done it wrong, you need to get it where it needs to be, just use the align tool. But, you know, so that I don't have to do it again, I'm just going to draw it right the first time, hopefully. Okay, so let's get this so I can see things a little better. So my wall starts at the grid line A and 2. So I'm going to start drawing from here down and go over and down again. Okay. So I go to architecture, wall, make sure that my location line is finish face, core face exterior. There's a lot of things to remember the first time you do this, right? And you'll forget and you'll do it wrong. You have to redo it, and that's okay. There's no problem with that. And I'm going to start here at grid A and 2. Click, move in the direction I want to go. Now it's drawing along, do you see how, wait, let's see. It's drawing along where it needs to. I want to show you one quick thing though. Let me change my view real quick, sorry. I'm going to hit escape. There we go. Okay, wall, WA, finish face, core face exterior. Okay, A and 2, there we go, click. Oh, it's not drawing shaded, shoot. All right, so one thing I want to show you is that, you see I can flip my wall? I'm using the space bar to flip my wall. And that is because if I click now, you see how the exterior of the wall is on the inside of the space? It's wrong. Whereas if I had space barred, it would put it the right way. It's still drawing along that core face, but it's confused on what inside and outside is, right? So you're probably thinking, well, why does it have a core face interior and exterior option? Well, it gets confused. It has it so that if you know, in the ideal world, it will work, but it does get confused at times. So I just want to make you aware if your wall is being drawn inside out, right? You can click on it and space bar, or you can space bar it while you're drawing and it will flip it. You can also, after it's drawn, use this little grip, change wall's orientation, and it will do the same thing, right? Okay, so I'm going to continue drawing my wall here. I'm going to delete that one and start over actually. Click on wall. I'm going to start at A and 2 again, and I'm going to go from A and 2 all the way down to D and 2. So click and space bar, zooming in and out down to D and 2. Click. Then I have to go over to D and 1. 1 and D, whatever, right? Click. And I'm going to continue on all the way down to E. I'm zooming out, I'm zooming in, I'm panning, right? I'm doing it pretty quick because I'm used to it. You guys will get used to it. But don't be afraid to zoom in, to zoom out, and to pan back and forth, right? To get things where they need to be. Zoom way in there if you need to. It's not wrong, right? It really helps. Click. Zoom out so I can see the grids. I know I have to move in this direction, so I'm going to go all the way over to, it looks like, grid line 6. Okay, so I'm going to go over to grid line 6, and I'm going to click, and then I'm going to go all the way up to grid line, what is that, C, right? Okay, looks good. Grid line C, click. So I'm right here now, and I need to go over to grid line 7. Okay, grid line 7, click, and then go back up to grid line 2, A, grid line, oh, I hit escape on my command, so I'm just gonna click on wall again, continue on, click, spacebar to get it the right orientation, go up to there, click, and then finish off my wall. You'll notice that as I move down and I kind of move along, all of the walls join very nicely, right? All of the elements come together and clean up. There's no trimming or extending that needs to happen, right? I don't have to fill it the edges like I do with AutoCAD. All of this just sort of automatically joins very nicely, which is really wonderful. And I have the outline of my space here now, right? Now that I have the outside of my space, I could start drawing the inside of my space. Although these are going to be a different wall type, right? It's going to be probably, you know, a 2x4 or a 2x6 wall with gypsum board on both sides. Okay. Any questions on any of that so far? Okay, so I'm going to pop into 3D and take a look at this. And in doing this, I just realized I did something bad. I forgot to do something. I forgot to define how tall my walls were going to be, right? I just started drawing. And the implication, because I started on the main level, is that these walls do start on the main level. So if I click on one, it says the base constraint is the main level, which is great. But it says up to top of wall. So I was actually pretty lucky on that one because, yeah, I probably wanted to go to top of wall, right? But let's say that you forgot to do the same thing that I did and you need to fix it. How do I fix that? Well, I'm going to want to probably choose all of these walls at the same time. So I'm going to go into my 3D view here. I'm going to hover over one of my walls. Remember this. Tab one time, click, select them all at once. And then I'm going to change the top definition or whatever I want to change about them. So let's take them all the way up to roof, right? Or wherever they needed to be, top of wall. If it says unconnected here, then you'll just change it to have a top definition, okay? So I have all my lovely walls drawn. Looks pretty good. I'm going to go back to my main level here. Now I want to add some doors and I want to add some windows, all right? This cabin, let's look at the doors and windows we have here. View, there we go. This has some funky kind of windows, okay? So we'll get to that. You won't have the right window type for these yet, but I do want to talk about windows. You'll probably be able to download a fixed window like this, and you'll be able to download some of these just generic type windows, which is what you're going to do for your assignment. And then we'll go back and talk about how to customize them. Because I think it's important to be able to find windows within the library, the Revit library, or online and use them, but also how to create some custom shaped ones, okay? We also have some doors here. So I'm going to zoom in here. We have, let's see. We have a door with glass in it. We have a sliding door, right? We have some just swing doors. We have some, looks like sliding doors, pocket doors is what I'm looking for the interior. But all of these are labeled, right? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So if I go back and I look at my floor plan, right, I can see that this is door number 1, okay. Well, door number 1 happens to be this glass door, and it's 8 foot tall and it's 4 foot wide, okay. And then I've got some interior doors and all that good stuff. So let me show you how to add doors and let me show you how to add windows, okay. I'm gonna bring this full screen here. I'm gonna maximize this. The process really for adding doors and windows to your model is identical, essentially. Doors and windows are both considered components, right? And I think I've said before, components and the term families are used interchangeably, and really they mean the same thing in Revit. So a family, if you want to, those of you who've used AutoCAD, that's the same thing as a 3D block, essentially. A family is a series of objects that work together to represent an item. So a door is not just a door, right? It's a panel, it has a frame, it has door hardware like a doorknob on it. It might have a kick plate, it might have a closer, right? So a family is all of those elements grouped together to function as that object, right? And it's 3D in Revit, okay? So if I go to the architecture tab, you'll notice that we have door and we have window, right? Doors and windows are both components / families. Term means the same thing, okay? One time I think I sort of I was looking on the Autodesk blog wondering why we had 2 different names for things. And I believe they said that component was what they originally called them. And then in the progression of the software, they started calling them families later on. But the command sort of stayed the same, right? So I can click on component and I can choose place a component, which is what we want to do. We don't want to model and place yet, all right? And that will place different types of components. Doors and windows, because they're so common, I would assume, usage, they're very common, and obviously in architecture. They have their own button, their own icon to use. They have their own keyboard shortcut, DR and WN, which I'll use to place these, okay? So if I want to place a door, for example, I can click on door, and I can use this drop-down menu and properties like I do with walls to see what kind of doors are in this project. There's only one so far. But if I, this was the right type and I wanted to place the door, I would pick the size. I would hover over a wall and click. Okay. Those of you that use AutoCAD, you're like, wow, so amazing, right? All I do is click and this door magically trims out an opening. It's so magical. And it really is magical, right? Components / families are considered hosted elements, and so they need something to be hosted into. And a wall is considered a host, right? So what you may have noticed is when I click on door, I can't just click in space over here, right? I can't create a door out in no man's land. But I can go over a wall, click, and place a door, okay? And what that looks like in 3D, oh, look at that. When I create the door in 2D, it magically generates the elevation view in 3D, okay? So let's see, what side of the building is that? That's the west side. So we'll look at the west side elevation, and I see my doors appear, okay? Window tile, WT, and I can open up the two views at the same time. Click here, zoom in and out, click here, zoom in and out, right? Just to look and see what's happening. All right, I'm going to click on this door. And again, because I'm on the main level floor plan, it sort of Revit assumes that this door needs to be placed on the main level, which makes sense because why would you place doors on levels you're not viewing, right? It does happen. So if you want the door to be on a different level, then you'd specify a different level. But in this case, right, you'll notice the level is assigned to main level. All right, I am allowed to give it a sill height. This is the same thing as a base offset. So I could say 6 inches, enter, and it pops the door up just 6 inches, okay? I can click on that door again, and I could change it to, well, I don't have any wall up here, so it's not gonna work, but you get the idea. You could change the level that it rests at, okay? If I click on this door, a couple things you want to notice. We have these little grips that will allow you, this is magic too if you've been using AutoCAD, right? Click, oh, flips the swing, right? Oh, look at that. Interior to exterior, side to side, left hand, right hand, right? I can change how these things function, okay? I can also click on the door and I could use my arrows and I could nudge it to move it, okay? I could also, this is the tricky part with Revit, right? There's not really, well, there but it's a little bit more complicated, but normally there's a specific distance away from a wall you want a door to exist, a foot, 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 foot, right? If I look at the imbue cabin, let's look at the imbue cabin here. I don't know, well, I guess they don't have it dimensioned, right? But we could say, oh, look, it's a foot off of this interior wall right here. So this is one of those instances where in Revit, I get it as close to where I need it as possible, and then I have to move it into place, right? I think I've said that, which sounds very ridiculous, right? In AutoCAD, you try and draw things exactly perfect the first time. In Revit, you get things very close, and then you place it, okay? So I'm going to just flip it to the interior. I'm going to change, because I think that's what, it looked like that. There's my swing, right? And if I wanted it to be a foot off of this wall, I'm just going to use a dimension to place it. That's how I'm going to place things. And again, very simply, we haven't talked about dimensions a whole lot, right? But I'm just going to go to annotate, aligned. Okay. I'm going to click here. You'll notice that I get these kind of almost object snaps appearing on objects here that I want to dimension, but I can click, tab, click in space. Let me do it one more time. I dimension that. I clicked on the edge here, click. I moved over to this wall, but I don't want it to be measured off the center line. I want it to be measured off the drywall here. So I'm going to tab until I get a blue highlight. You see that blue highlighting gauge? Click. And then I click in nowhere land and I get a dimension. All right. Now you'll get used to this process really quickly. This is I'll say this, but this is the kind of process. I know that Revit works like this. It slows things down a little bit, right? In Revit or in AutoCAD, we have things like the from command, and we have M2P to use to very quickly move and center objects. And we do have those methods in Revit, but they're a little bit slower, I think, than AutoCAD. But now this is 4 foot and 3/4 of an inch. Well, let's say I want it to be 18 inches off of this measurement. So I click on the door. My dimension becomes editable. The text becomes blue, and I could type in 1'6", enter, and now that door is 1'6" away from that wall. Okay, let me undo that. I click on the object I want to move, 1'6", enter, and the door moved. Okay, if you want to move something using a dimension, you want to click on the object to be moved. If you have two walls and you want them to be 5 feet apart, pick the wall that you want to move to make that dimension work, and it will move that wall. So I click, I hit delete, and there's my door placed, and I can view it in my elevation. Now I'm going to click on this door. I don't want it to have a 6-inch offset, so I'm going to do 0, enter, and it goes back down. All right, so this door is great, except that it's not the right kind of door. The door that I actually want has glass in it, right? So I need to be able to, number one, change the definition of this door so it has glass in it, or I need to be able to go out and find another family that is already defined as a glass door and use it, okay? Families/components function a lot like AutoCAD blocks. So when you want to have something custom, you either draw it or you go out and you download the block to use. All right. I don't just sort of leave this door here and I could leave this door here, but I want the door to kind of represent what it's actually supposed to be, have glass in it. Okay. So I'm going to go to architecture. I'm going to go to door. This door doesn't have any glass, so I need to go find one that has glass. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to load a family into my project. Okay, so this is something new we haven't talked about. I'm going to go to Insert, and I'm going to choose Load Family. And this Load Family dialog box pops up, and by default it takes you to the location of the Revit library. And the Revit library is where all of the families that are inherently kind of stock that come with Revit, that's where they're all stored. Okay, and they are pretty well categorized. There are a few that are a little odd, but in general, I can come down here and say, oh, there's doors. Click, click. Oh, I have commercial, hardware, and residential doors, and then I have a bunch that are kind of just out here. If I click on it and I just click one time, I can use my arrow key to mouse down and look at them. Ooh, there's a sliding. We'll use that in a minute, right? Okay, well, none of those doors are the ones I want, so I'm going to click on residential. No, no, no. We're just going to continue to move down until we find the one I want. So Revit actually has, oh, that looks pretty close. That looks pretty close, except it has those little, muntins or whatever on there, but I know that I can turn those off, and I'll show you how. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to hit open. And it will say, okay, that's great. And this only occurs on like doors and windows and things that are dimensional that have different sizes. It says, that's great. We have all of these sizes of this door. Which one do you want to load into your project, right? And usually my answer is all of them. Although this one actually is a lot. We could just pick one or two because we know the size of this glass door. So that glass door was, I think it was 4 foot by 8 foot. Number one. Let's see. Yeah, 8 foot tall by 4 foot wide. So we don't have one of those, but we have one that is 8 foot tall. So So I think I'm just going to pick all the 8-foot tall doors with this glass one. Click on one, hold down Shift, click on a second, it highlights all of those, and I'm going to hit OK. And now by doing that, it loaded all of those door types in there. Okay, so now when I go back to architecture, or I type DR, which is the keyboard shortcut for door, you'll see that I have that glass door available to me. All right, so I don't have the exact size that I need, but I think you guys can all know by now we can alter what we do have to create the size that we need, right? With a wall, if I don't have the assembly I want, I grab a wall that is very closely defined to the one I want to create. I duplicate, rename, redefine. And I'm going to do the same thing with my door here. I have a 3-foot by 8-foot, right? But I don't have a 4-foot by 8-foot. So I'm going to pick my 3-foot by 8-foot. Okay. And I could place one if I wanted just to look at it. But just like a wall type, I can immediately choose Edit. So I've edited it, duplicate, rename. So this will be 48. This is an easy rename because I know the dimensions. 48 inches by 96. Rename, okay. So I've just duplicated, renamed, and now I'm going to redefine the dimensions of it, right? A door doesn't have an assembly like a wall. It has dimensionality, it has a frame, different things like that. So anything that you can alter dimension-wise will show here, right? And they're all kind of free game. You don't want to make it extreme, like make this 400 feet tall, because it might not work, might over-constrain your little door. But I can come in and say, well, the width is going to be 4 foot instead of 3 foot. And I can hit OK. And I just created a new door type, right? Now, click, I place that door, and oh, look at that, there's my door. Okay. I'm going to click on my door and I'm going to look at it. So I don't have to go into edit type to do this, but you'll notice there are some kind of aesthetic settings in the properties when I select that door. Like, do you want to show the grill? Nope, I don't. And it turns that grill off, right? So I don't see those muntins in there. Click. Do you want the swing to be 90 degrees, meaning open all the way on the floor plate? Or do we want it to be 45 degrees? Enter. I want it to look like that. Okay. So there are a few things that we can do here to customize it the way we want it to. Okay. Now, this is actually the door that we want to be 4 foot by 8 foot. So I already have a door there. I could delete this one and place a new one, but I can also select it, and I can use this drop down, and I can change the type. 4 foot by 8 foot. Now, the way that this door sort of placed itself was from the center line of the door. So you notice that now it's not 18 inches away from this wall, right? It's a lot closer because the door was bigger. So that is one kind of bad thing about Revit. It replaced that component from the center point, and I can't really change that. But I am able to get the door I want. It looks the way I want it to, and I can just reposition it, right? So I'm going to do a dimension, annotate, aligned. I click on the frame of my door. I tab, click, escape, click on the door. Let's do 2 feet here, 2 foot off that wall, right? If I click on the door, there's my little grips. I can flip it if I want to. Click, delete, and there's my glass door, right? I'm going to delete this door, delete that door, and there's my door, okay? So again, okay, just to kind of reiterate the process, I can go to Architecture, Door. I can use my drop down to pick what door I want to place. If I don't have a door type in here that looks like the one that I want to place, I can go to Insert, Load Family, or as I'm in the door command, Load Family pops up here. Click. Okay. I can go to the door location, and I can find the one I want. I do know that I'm probably going to need a sliding glass door, which I think was over here somewhere. If you're not finding what you need, just look around. That one looks like the one I need. So I'm going to hit open, click, shift, click to select all the sizes you want. Okay. And I've just loaded a type. So I can use existing door types in there, or I can go and find a new one and use that one. Okay. If I need to change the size of one of my doors, I can pick the door in the project and hit edit type, or I can go to door. I can select the one I want to edit. I can hit edit type, duplicate, rename, redefine, right? Same process as a wall. Duplicate. Let's make this 96 inches tall. Okay. And here, right, I don't have an assembly, but I do have these objects. So the height of this is going to change from 6'8" to 8 foot. Enter. Right? I hit OK. And now I have that door ready for use. Let's look at the imbue cabin. I can't quite remember where the sliding door was now. But I know we have one, right? Let's see. I thought we had one. Didn't we have a sliding door somewhere? Huh, maybe we didn't. Oh yeah, right there, right there. There's our sliding door. So my sliding door, I come over here, I place it, click. You'll notice that if I'm not over an element that will host that, it doesn't work. The second I move over a host, it works. Okay. If I placed it and I realize, oh my gosh, it's not the right width, right? It's the right height, but it's not the right width. I need to change that. Because when I look at the drawings here, it's number 2. Let's see how wide that is. Number 2, that is 8 foot wide. So it's 8 foot wide by 8 foot tall. Oh, that's actually 9 foot tall. But we'll just leave it at 8 foot. Okay, I can edit type, duplicate. We'll give it a rename. It's going to be 96 by 96. Okay, we'll change the width to 8 foot, enter. The height is already 8 foot. I hit OK, and it changed it. Okay. So now I have my glass door. Now I just need to position it wherever it ends up needing to be positioned. Okay. So I'm going to use my little dimension, annotate, aligned, click, tab, click. And maybe I want it to be 2 feet off of that wall, 2 foot, enter, click, delete. There we go. Did that a little fast, but you can rewind the video, right? Okay, so that's how we're going to place doors, right? One more thing we're going to talk about today is how we're going to place windows, which is exactly how we place doors. The process is identical. So windows, instead of using the door command, we're just going to use the window command, right? Click. If I want to place a window, I have window types in the project. So we do have a few here that have already been loaded, which is nice. So I can pick from those, right? I can choose a casement 3 foot by whatever that dimension is, 34 by 36. Hover over my window, click, or over my wall, click, and it places a window. Okay. So windows, again, like doors, are families / components. Windows are associated with the floor plate that you're on. So if I'm on the main level, this window by default is associated with the main level. I can change the level if I want to. All right. It has a sill height. So this one is 3 feet because a 3 foot sill height for a window makes sense. But I could also change that. So I can click on it and say, let's make it a 4 foot window sill. Enter. Okay. If there is a new size of this window that I need to create and it's not existent in my Revit file currently, I click on it, I edit type, I duplicate it, I give it a new name. So let's make this 48 inches wide. I hit OK. Now the width is, instead of 2 foot 10 is going to be 4 foot, right? That's what I'm intending on making it. 4 foot, enter. Okay. And now I've just changed that window type to 4 foot, right? Same exact process as with a door. Okay. So if there is a window type that I need that is not in my project currently, I would go to Insert, Load Family. Instead of going in the Door folder, I'm going to go all the way down to Windows. I'm going to find the window that I need in here. Right, so skylights are considered windows, right? So whatever one you want to use, you can come in here and find. Okay. I'm not really going to get into how do we go out and find them on the internet yet, which we will, because Revit, although they do have a lot of window types, they don't have everything that we need. But the internet generally does. So I can go to different manufacturers, window manufacturers, different websites, and I can find other families / components that I can then load into my Revit project and use. Okay. But in general, I think for what you're doing right now, I think that you'll be able to find what you need in the Revit project library. Okay. Any questions about windows or doors? Okay. So I haven't published your assignment quite yet, but you're going to draw some more walls, and then I'm going to have you add doors and windows to your project. So I'll have that posted by the end of the day today. I just don't quite have it posted. And I think for your window and door types, just try and find something that is closest to what you see in the view plans as you can find. Just find something very close. Now, with that said, I don't want you quite yet to worry about these custom shaped windows. Okay, so what I want you to worry about placing, I want to see, if there's a door here, place the door. If there's windows here, place the windows, right? There's windows here, there's windows here. Oh, that's a sliding door, that's a sliding door, that's a sliding door. So I want you to place all the doors, all the windows, exterior and interior. Find something that is most similar to what you see on this drawing here, with the exception of these kind of custom. So just if there's a window here, place a window, right? Try and get it to be as tall as the wall here, but don't worry about if it doesn't kind of angle like this and follow the roof line. We'll talk about that a little bit later, all right? So just find windows that are square, right? The right size, place them all where they need to go, and then we'll talk later on how they were able to get these custom shapes. So essentially you'll just be doing square windows for here, here, or the rectangular, I guess, right? And just use one type. There's a big window, there's a window. This is a sliding door, okay? Use this A2.2 window and door types to see how big these windows are and how tall they are. I think it's completely appropriate just to say for this window right here, we'll just do a square window. We'll encompass the whole thing, which means it's going to be 9'6" plus 2 foot. So that's 11'6". It's a big window, right? By 6 foot. So we'll have 3 of those, but don't worry about having this piece on the bottom and this piece on top and it angled. Just do kind of a rectangular one piece of window. Okay, I think that'll work just fine for this case. Make sense? Okay. So I'll post that. Like I said, I don't have the assignment quite posted. I will post it by the end of the day, but that's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be making sure that all of your walls are generated, that the interior walls are generated, and that your doors and windows are added to the project. Okay? All right. We'll